Hello, everyone.
Hello,
Yes,
Hello.
so uh,
good morning.
that now we move on to the next panel. So when I start the planning for this event, I think it's important to learn from the VC experts, the practitioner. But for me, I guess I didn't get a chance to share with everyone that I have a deep connection to India because my husband is from Chennai, and he went to NITT, and subsequently he went to IMB. And because of him I got to understand India market a lot, and definitely there's so much hidden treasure in terms of startups and investment opportunities. But as a foreign investor, I myself actually experience a lot of challenges in terms of applying for the FDI, getting a corporate bank account set up, getting to know about the taxation complexity. So which is why I came up the idea of have structuring the second panel, how to navigate the tax and legal aspect when investing in India as a foreign investor. So as an investor, I would love to learn from all these seasoned speakers and experts. But at the same time, for startups, right? I think that all the founders, before you approach to any international investor, you should have some basic knowledge of how to, apply for FDI. What are the requirements? What are the restrictions? And you cannot just rely all your lawyers and accountant to answer on your behalf. You should have basic knowledge so that you can give the comfort to the investors, right? So which is why I like to introduce our speakers. I guess my moderator is Wahani Nir, which is from AMB Legal. I will leave you to the stage and introduce the rest of the speakers. So the stage is yours now, Wahani.
Pavi, I think you scared Rohini. She's run away.
Yep, then that's fine. While we're waiting for her, I will do the introduction. Matthew is a partner from Spice Group Legal, and we have Nassim, which is a partner from AMB Legal, and Himanshi, which is a partner from PwC, and also Abhishek which is the tax and regulatory services from Spicewood business. So the stage is yours, Mohini.
Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm extremely sorry. There's some internet connection issues. I'm extremely sorry. Um, yes, very good. Good morning. You guys can hear me?
Yes, we
Yeah,
can
we
hear
can hear you. You can go ahead. So I basically introduce everybody with the name and title, so you can go on with the. Would you like to have everyone to quickly have 30 seconds to introduce themselves to tell us what they do specifically?
That'll be great.
Yeah, why don't we start with Hamishi?
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. Hi, everyone. This is Himanshu Mandavia, and I'm a partner with PwC here in the tax practice. And I focus a lot on the venture capital investments, early stage investors, and help startups raise money structure their companies in a tax and regulatory efficient manner. So that's primarily my role here at PwC.
Thank you. How about Nassim?
Hi everyone. This is Nazneen. I'm also a partner with ANB Legal. Our focus areas include mainly corporate laws and private equity practice. We work with both investors as well as companies and help them successfully close up various investment transactions and help with the fundraising exercise.
Thank you. And Matthew?
Hi, my name is Matthew. I'm a founder at a law firm called Spice Root Legal based in Bangalore. I focus on tech, media, telecom companies, and basically everything that they do. So everything from corporate regulatory issues to tech M&A to private equity and venture capital, with a very active interest in data protection and information as well.
Thank you. And Abhishek?
Hi, Abhishek this side. I'm part of Spice Route. Primarily, my role is to lead the practice from tax and regulatory fund. I've been working with both funds and startups, primarily supporting them from tax and regulatory perspective from India.
And Rohini, the stage is yours.
Thank you. So, so let me start with saying that it's a pleasure to moderate this session on this topic today, which I'm sure, along with the audience today, I too am going to gain a lot. The experts here today are the who's a who in the world of overseas investment, and especially to give their insight on the legal and tax implications. So please join me to invite this on this forum today, some of the legal eagles and the tax tigers to give their insight on the key elements encompassing any foreign investments into India. Let me start with Matthew. Hi, Matthew. Nice to see you here.
Hi, Rohini. How are you?
Very well. So we've had a few interactions with your firm in the past, and let me tell you, it's been wonderful to interact with your colleagues. So, as an expert in cross-border transactions, what is the usual discussion you had when you're approached by an overseas client wanting to invest in our country?
Right. So it really depends on where the client is from, right? And given the audience that I quickly looked at, let me take examples from the audience. A Singapore Hong Kong investor will look at India very differently from a US European investor, who will look at it very differently from a Chinese investor, right? And just to make generalizations, when I sit with a Singapore, Hong Kong, even Malaysia to some extent investor, you're looking at people who are very used to highly efficient, transparent ways of doing business. And while India is a lot better than it was when I started practice, we're still nowhere close to global standards on transparency and efficiency. So with a Singapore or a Hong Kong investor, to have a chat managing expectations is very important. Similarly, if it's a European or a US investor, they're used to a very straightforward way of doing business and negotiations. We Indians are a little bit roundabout our rights. And that's a conversation you need to have very early on, because just negotiating styles will mess up potential deals, right? So that's a conversation that you need to have. And of course, if you are for some reason a Chinese investor looking at India these days, and these days, if you're Chinese, I don't know why you'd look at India, but if you are, then the biggest conversation on the table is political risk. What will you do when 3 Chinese troops come into India and the government decides to revoke all your licenses because of your country of origin or residence? But that said, 4 main risks, right? And we, grade them accordingly. Political risk, obviously Chinese, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, neighboring countries, basically. Tax risk, I'll leave it to Himanshu and Abhishek to take us through that. They know far more than I ever will. Regulatory risks, that's a new animal on the horizon. Increased regulatory risk, increased regulatory tendency to be to have a lot of discretion and exercise it in different circumstances. So our ability to kind of foresee, hey, you're in an unregulated sector associated with banks, or you're in telecom, well, it's 100% allowed, investments are allowed, the government may not like it, especially if you are Huawei. So that's the discussion you need to have around there. And then, of course, your typical legal risks, courts, disputes, stamping, arbitration, enforcement. I'm sure everyone knows that by now. But those are the 4 kinds of risks that we usually take them through. Does that help?
Yes. Okay. So, I know that you had, your main expertise is in the fintech space. So, would you be able to tell our participants today in this space, in the fintech space? Could you just elaborate on that?
Yeah. So just to give you a gradation and an introduction into fintech, let's talk about the tech, media, telecom space. Which is basically a space which since the outsourcing revolution has been seen as a free-for-all. Investments are allowed, 100% investments, very few restrictions, all of that. The first step back towards that from that was media, where the government realized that media is a sector that is sensitive, and therefore certain controls on media in different ways have been imposed. The next step back was telecom, notably in the case of Huawei, but where we've seen that a large number of express and implicit political risk gets fitted into the telecom space. Technology is by and large been free of regulatory influences, regulatory risks, till about a year or two ago, when everybody in India suddenly woke up to the fact that there are large infrastructural risks with allowing there are large perceived infrastructural risks with allowing foreign money into sensitive technology spaces, the most sensitive being that technology which deals with banks and financial institutions. In the fintech space, over the last 1 year, we've had multiple regulatory hangups. We've had multiple investments. We have multiple investments holding up startups from progressing because of who the shareholders are. We have multiple investments which have not gone through because it's come now through the approval route. So there are risks incident. There are risks which an investor should consider, i.e., is because the investor is from a country which is neighboring India and whose politics are not maybe seen at the present moment as being aligned to India's. Are there risks that you are taking, or that are there risks that you're imposing on a startup which is unable to bear risks, right? At that stage. On the other side, does the fact that you're going to invest, are you, is your investment itself at political risk? Are you at the risk of the government saying that you can't repatriate? Those are the kind of risks that are highlighted in these deals, particularly in fintech. So we've seen the Reserve Bank of India be very, very careful with regulatory approval. So if your company intends to apply for a NBFC lending license or an NBFC account aggregator license, or if you want to deal with banks and there are data issues that come up, the fintech space is very well tied into these.
Okay.
And that's what we kind of spend a large part of our day advising fintechs on.
Okay, that was very insightful and very helpful. Uh, Going to Himanshu, coming to your expertise on tax. Now, we've seen a lot of structures recently where the holding companies outside India. Are there any India tax issues that needs to be considered for such structures, including, like Matthew just rightly mentioned, the round tripping issues?
Right, right. No, sure, Rainy. So I think what is happening today is, and there are two baskets of this question, right? I mean, holding structures just for the foreign investors themselves, and holding structures generally being set up for raising money by the Indian startup companies. And each structure is unique, right, in its facts, and the tax issues will typically depend on certain aspects like what is the status of the shareholders, at what stage is the company, is it just being set up or is it already been in business for some time, what is the business model of the company, does it have some assets or is it just very asset light, and so on and so forth, right? And also the jurisdiction in which the holding company is being considered. So all those things kind of play into this discussion about the holding company and the tax issues. But one important part of this discussion on the holding structures, whether it is a pure overseas holding structure or an structure for India investments, is the valuation. So today, from a tax perspective, the biggest thing that needs to be considered is that there are valuation rules which need to be complied with, and which would need to be complied by the investors whenever the investment is being made, and when the holding company is again making investments into India. So for foreign investors, it's important to note that there's a very unique provision under the Indian tax rules where you may be ending up paying tax at the time of investment itself in case the fair value of the investment as per tax rules turns out to be higher than the acquisition price. So the valuation question comes up very typically in any kind of these structures. There is also today a discussion on the usefulness of such holding structures, right? While there is a lot of trend of setting up the holding structures for raising money because some of the foreign investors do prefer it, but there is also now on the other side this discussion on whether a holding structure is helpful, especially with the Mauritius, Singapore treaties, etc., taking away the tax exemption, right? So there is a discussion on whether the structure should be set up for taking these investments or whether it is useful to make investments directly from the home country of the investors. Then there are questions around GAR and MLI rules on if you set up a structure in a particular jurisdiction, whether you will still be able to take advantage of the tax treaties that are there, unless you have some substance or you have people operating out of that jurisdictions. And from a promoter perspective, the round tripping questions that, how do you own in an overseas holding structure? There are RBI issues to be considered. And again, from a tax perspective, it is typically the valuation rules which become critical. That are you getting it at a fair value? How are you getting the shares, etc. So these are two,
Right.
three things which kind of play into the holding structure discussion. And add to that now, the point which Matthew mentioned on RBI stand on approval. So in a fintech sector, when you are taking approvals, which is the holding structure jurisdiction becomes important, because now RBI is looking at giving approvals only to FATF compliant countries. So if you need any licenses, again, that is another aspect which needs to be taken care of. So all in all, we need to marry this holding structure discussion between tax and regulatory requirements both, and then come to an answer.
So with that, Himanshu, do you think that the provisions, these tax provisions and the provisions that we have prevalent in India, puts a Herculean task before the investors to make sure that they're not entangled in the web of these provisions?
I mean, I would say that like any country, right, which is an operating jurisdiction, which is not a pure holding jurisdiction or a tax haven kind of a thing. This is an operating jurisdiction. It will have its tax and regulatory requirements, and any investor coming into India for the first time needs to be aware of this plethora of tax and regulations that are available here or that need to be complied here. Of course, I mean, India has been simplifying its laws over a period of time, and many of the processes have been simplified over a period of time. So, I mean, there are lots of laws to be complied with, but the investor, once he comes in for the first time, if he does it right, he takes proper inputs and designs the structure appropriately. I think then over a period of time, one gets used to it and then kind of takes it in his stride. And you just need to ensure that you have known the compliances that are required, so that you are not struggling with the deal timeline. For example, let's just give a small example. That a simple thing like obtaining a permanent account number. Okay, you need something for investing in India. It's like a very basic process, and when you talk to someone, it would be like, oh, I just need to make an application. But for making the application, there are some documentation requirements which can take some time. So if you know this, then you prepare for it in advance. But if you kind of just assume and start doing something, then you can get stuck in the deal timeline. So we need to know this properly. But otherwise, I think things have been simplified over a period of time. Just it's all encompassing, and just take care of it while doing the structure.
Very well said, Himanshu. I think that gives our investor participants today here an insight on how they should go about with it in case they are planning to invest in India. So coming to Nazneen,
Hi, Ravi.
how do you, in your experience, deal with the various provisions of FEMA and FDI? And is there a crystal ball one can gaze into to get some answers?
Yes. So, like, in fact, even like Bovi mentioned at the start of the sentence, for foreign investors, it is important to have knowledge and awareness themselves about, at least broadly, on the regulatory aspects when they are investing into India. And they cannot rely blindly on what the consultants are advising them. So it is very important to be, abreast of the latest regulations, policy decisions that would affect your investment being made into India. And especially on the foreign investment regulations, India has got a plethora of regulations which they keep amending from time to time as well. It's a very dynamic and evolving field, and they are quite responsive in terms of updating the foreign policy. So it can become a little challenging, not just for investors, but even professionals like all of us here who are practicing in this field, to keep abreast of the latest directions or the latest policy decisions that are being promulgated by RBI and the central government. So currently, to help with anybody evaluating a prospective investment decision into India, so currently the regulations are contained in the non-debt instrument regulations of the RBI, which came out as recently as 2019, last year. And very recently, to consolidate the various instructions that the government has in place on the FDI policy, on 15th October, they have come up with a consolidated FDI policy, which makes an attempt to consolidate in one place all the do's and don'ts and the conditions which are applicable in terms of foreign investments.
Okay.
So it might be useful, for prospective investors coming into India to at least familiarize themselves with the basic conditions that are mentioned about the entry routes, what sectors your investment can be freely made in, which are the regulated sectors. At least that you would get an overview of this by going through the policy. And other than that, the RBI also makes an attempt to update its clarifications and guidelines, in terms of various FAQs that they have on their website to try and have a better stakeholder management and representation and clarifications with them. So while the regulatory scenario is quite dynamic, the government is definitely making its attempts to simplify it for the foreign investors and try and encourage more investments coming into India.
Right, right. So, while Matthew mentioned some of the risks which needs to be kept in mind when you're looking at any overseas investment into India, could you just throw some light on some of the legal nuances involved while structuring a transaction? Can you share with us any of your recent structures involving overseas investment?
Sure, sure. So, from a foreign investor's perspective, when they are evaluating making their investment into India, they need to give weightage and consideration to a plethora of factors, whether the sector that they are proposing to invest in, whether it's a regulated sector. So, for instance, for FDI investments coming into India, there are a lot of sectors which are under the automatic route, and any foreign investment into these sectors does not require the approval of the RBI or the central government. Whereas there are certain sectors like pharma, defense, etc., which are still regulated, and any investments coming in from abroad into these sectors need to be first approved by the government. Then again, there are sector-specific caps which are involved for certain sectors like pharma. 70 up to 74% is under the automatic route. Whereas beyond that, if you want to make a brownfield investment into India, you would still need to go to the regulator for its approval. There are certain sectors like e-commerce or again pharma, where there are also certain FDI-linked performance conditions attached to your investment that is coming in. Whereas other sectors like technology or software development do not have any conditions attached to foreign investments coming into these industries. So for an investor, it is important, as to what type of regulatory scenario it is getting into while making the investment here. So those aspects need to be considered while structuring a transaction. Other than that, of course, the instrument that it is considering investing in India, whether it's an equity investment or whether the investment is going to be under the debt route, depending
Right.
on that, which regulation would apply to them would become important.
Okay.
So often investors also need to keep in mind that there are various securities which are, a hybrid of debt and equity. So sometimes they may be, while structuring a transaction, it is important to know small things like, if the instrument that you are using for your investment here, if it's a compulsorily convertible instrument, such as a compulsorily convertible preference share or a compulsorily convertible debenture,
Hmm.
it would be treated as equity, and it would get governed by the FDI guidelines for the non-debt instrument rules.
Right.
Whereas even if it's a partially convertible share or a partially convertible or an optionally convertible debenture, even though it is ultimately convertible into equity, but because it's optional or partially convertible in nature, it does not get governed by the equity investment rules, but rather gets covered under the external commercial borrowing guidelines, and it gets covered under the debt route. So
Okay.
these are some of the important aspects that you need to keep in mind while structuring transactions. Of course, other than that, the nature of the entity that you're selecting as your investment vehicle and the jurisdiction and tax implications is something Himanshu also mentioned. Those have an important bearing in deciding what type of a structure you are looking at while investing into India.
Right. So with that, if I had to take it further, Abhishek, what do you think are the factors to be considered when one is selecting a holding company jurisdiction for making an investment in India?
Thank you, Rohini. From an investor perspective, investments into India are often structured through holding companies in various jurisdictions for a number of strategic or tax reasons. For instance, US investors directly investing into India may face difficulties in claiming credit of India capital gains tax on securities against US taxes. This will be primarily due to conflict in source rules between US and India. In such a case, the risk of double taxation may be avoided by investing through an intermediate holding company.
Okay.
Another reason could be absence of investment protection agreements with India. In my experience, over years, a major bulk of investments into India has come from countries such as Mauritius, Singapore, Netherlands, which have a developed and an established financial centers that have favorable tax treaties with India. While selecting a holding company jurisdiction, it is necessary to consider a range of factors, including political and economic stability, investment protection, corporate and legal system, availability of high quality administrative and legal support, banking facility, tax treaty network, reputation, and cost.
Okay.
From the perspective of the Indian tax laws, where obtaining a benefit under the tax treaty is one of the reasons for going for a holding company structure, the investor, basically the fund or the sub funds, need to be mindful of certain factors like who has control over the holding company, who are authorized to use who are the signatories of the bank account, who are the beneficial owner, where are the board meetings held. These are certain of the factors which are relevant to ensure that the holding company is also eligible to take a treaty benefit wherever if it's required. Yeah.
Okay, fine, fair enough. So, with this, can you briefly explain what are the investment structuring conditions as well as exit conditions an investor needs to be mindful of, especially from an India foreign exchange perspective?
Got it. From an investment structuring, basically, if an investor is looking for an exit or a buyout, and if they want to structure payouts through an earnout structure, uh, considering the NDI rules, the investor or the seller needs to be mindful of that not more than 25% of the total consideration can be paid by the buyer on a deferred basis, and that too within a period not exceeding 18 months from the date of transfer agreement. So this is very critical to ensure whenever you are structuring an payouts on a deferred basis. The seller is also it may be the seller should also be mindful that it is restricted to provide an indemnity for an amount not more than 25% of the total consideration.
Okay.
And that too, again, not for a period not exceeding 18 months from the date of full payment. So basically, whenever we are exiting a company and we want to structure or we want to give an indemnity to the buyer, we need to ensure that we are not giving indemnity for more than 25% of the consideration.
Okay.
Again, from an exit perspective, whenever we are making investments, we need to ensure that the foreign exchange regulations allow optionality clauses. Basically, optionality clauses are allowed under the FDI scheme, which is again subject to minimum lock-in period of 1 year, based on which would be effective from the date of allotment of such capital instrument. But again, the notion is that the non-resident investor shall not be eligible for exit at an assured return, and the such exits should be based on the prevailing pricing and valuation guidelines. But at the same time, investors could look at other structures of using a put call options uh, to get a certainty on the returns, basically.
Right. Okay. So while while we have dealt with the regulatory aspect, the tax aspect, the legal aspect that needs to be kept in mind while we're looking at an FDI into India, I'll quickly take 1 minute of each of our panelists today for one question, one last set of questions. Okay. So going to Himanshu. Himanshu, for the first time FDI investor looking at an investment in India, what would be that one or two comments that you would want to make to them from an Indian tax perspective?
Sure, Rainy. I think one general point which any foreign investor coming to India for the first time kind of needs to be aware of, that some of the rules in India can seem to be a little counterintuitive. Some of the things that we would have generally seen in foreign jurisdictions. I mean, a thing like an internal restructuring. Okay, so let's say there is already a company which is here, and the foreign investor comes in and says that, okay, for some reason I want to restructure this company. I want to swap the shares into a new company. In many of the foreign jurisdictions, those kind of internal restructurings are completely tax exempt as long as some conditions are fulfilled. But in India, unfortunately, many of such restructurings are not tax exempt. So even if it is like within internally the shareholders are living the same, etc., there could still be some tax. The other thing is, for example, I mentioned about some of the requirements at the time of entry. And most investors would never assume that when I make an investment, I may end up paying tax at the time of investment. So there are those rules from a tax perspective which they need to think about. So there are a couple of those things. And the third thing is, kind of aligning in with the regulatory requirements, especially for the fintech sector, right? That from FEMA, as Nazin mentioned, there are instruments like CCPS or CCDs only which can be used in order to qualify as equity. How do you marry those with the requirements from a capitalization perspective for the requirements prescribed under the RBI regulations? And at the same time, from a tax perspective, there are valuation norms for each of these instruments. And this becomes slightly more complicated when you have simultaneously foreign investment coming into the Indian company as well as Indian investors, because there are two sets of tax implications. One in the hands of investors, and unfortunately, there is still some form of angel tax that still applies in case of Indian domestic investors when money is being raised by the Indian company. And there are kind of there are two sides of the coin when you raise capital. That if you invest at less than fair value, then the investor pays a tax. But if you invest at more than fair value, then the company pays a tax if angel tax is applicable if you are raising money from domestic investors. So these are three things which we typically see when a company is raising money. And this needs to be taken care of from a foreign investor perspective to ensure that you are complying with all the regulations at the same time.
Okay, okay. Thank you, thank you. So with that, Abhishek, I think who better than you could tell us that how can a non-resident investor obtain tax certainty or mitigate the tax risk in India?
From a certainty perspective, foreign investors seeking certainty on the India tax implications of a specific transaction or structure or investment may seek an advance ruling. The rulings are pronounced by the Authority of Advanced Rulings, which is chaired by a retired Supreme Court judge. The rulings are binding on the taxpayer, basically the investor and the tax department, and may be sought in relation to a proposed transaction or a completed transaction. The rulings are provided within a period of 6 months, which is the but obviously there are delays in certain cases, but which is substantial. But these provisions are substantially aimed at reducing the overall time and cost of litigation. In terms of risk mitigation, care can also be taken while drafting documents and implementing structures, along with a coordinated strategy for tax compliance.
I think that is very insightful, Abhishek. I think investors are going to keep that in mind. Matthew, what are the key highlights of the Companies Act 2013, which we have in India, which an investor investing in India should be concerned about?
Again, I'll hark back to my previous question, which is it depends on where they're from. If they are from a common law country, there's very little in the Companies Act. You'd be scared of the FEMA a bit, but there's very little in the Companies Act that should scare you. If you're from the continental systems, if you're from Germany, if you're from Italy, I think one of the things that could potentially scare you is how courts in India work and how different courts in India are from how courts in Germany and Italy, and to a large extent, China would work. Right. So those are nuances which you've got to keep in mind while explaining this system to them. I don't think there is anything that is particularly scary about the Companies Act 2013. I think it's a fabulous step in the positive direction. From the 19th century, we finally come to the 20th century, approximately a year behind. There are questions like, why the hell do we still have par value? I mean, what notion does share premium account ever give to anybody? What is a yeah.
Very well said, Matthew.
Yeah, and just to add to what Matthew said, unfortunately, that classification of the capital between the face value and premium itself has some of the tax implications which I just alluded to earlier, right? That whether there could be an angel tax or not, and whether you can convert the preference shares into what number of equity shares can have some implications depending on whether you took the capital just as face value or par value, or whether you broke it up into face value and premium. So as Matthew said, that is one concept which still is relevant and which still needs to be taken into account.
Yeah.
Just one thing, guys, just to interrupt you. The one thing I would be scared of, and which investors are not scared of enough, is to become a director in an Indian company. I think that's the stupidest thing. Unless you have a army of compliance professionals and tax advisors like Himanshu helping you, there is be very scared of becoming a director, right? This is not easy. And
Very well said, Matthew. I think I agree with you. I think all of us would agree with you on that. So, last question, Nazneen, I have for you.
Sure.
There has been a lot of questions and issues regarding the press note 3 of 2020 and
Yes.
the investments by some of the disputing neighbors, especially
Yes.
post-COVID. Can you
Yes.
tell us something about it?
So it is important to also take into perspective the intent behind this press note. You know, the sole or the major intent of the Indian government in promulgating the circular was to ensure that there is no opportunistic acquisition or takeover of Indian companies, uh, taking advantage or a misadvantage, I would say, of the current pandemic scenario that had crippled almost most of the countries of the world. So this was more of a precautionary measure that was introduced at that time to ensure that the controlling stake of most of the Indian companies is not down sneakily through the backdoor route or something, not going out of the control of Indian companies without them realizing them under the garb of this investment rule. So, but the idea is that the regulators are not going to obstruct or come in your way of investments even coming in from these countries. The idea is to take an informed decision. So they would like to know who the ultimate beneficial owners who are investing into these companies are going to be. And once they have done their scrutiny, they fully intend to approve such proposals as well. In fact, to demonstrate this intention, recently on 9th November, they have also come out with an SOP of how these proposals for clearing the approval are going to be taken up, and streamlining what regulatory approvals are required, how the process will be taken up to try and give a boost to these proposals that are pending for clearance of foreign the direct investments that are coming in from these neighboring countries as well. So the government is taking steps in the right place, and hopefully,
Right.
hopefully with proper caution and regulatory compliance, we should
Right.
be able to progress with investments even from these countries.
Right. Thank you, Nazneen. So now I have one question for each of our panelists today. So the question is, if I'm Chinese and I want to invest or enter India market, what are the options available to me as on date, keeping in mind the Indian legal framework? Matthew.
I think we should go with Nazneen first because my answer is very short and simple. I'd like to hear Nazneen first.
Nazneen.
Make all the disclosures. Make all the disclosures. Seek the consultant and go in for your approval. Use the influence of your AD banks and try and move your application as quickly as possible. So once you have the green signal from the regulators, I don't think it should be a hurdle to go ahead with it.
Right. Matthew.
Yeah, I disagree entirely. I think if you're Chinese and you're looking at investments, go invest in Indonesia. Don't think of India. This is not please. Right? Too
Very
much.
well said. No? Okay, very well said. Himanshu.
I think part of both. So somewhere direct investments by Chinese or investors from neighboring countries, there is this whole approval process, and I think there is a huge backlog right now at the government side on even applications which have been made in the past. So any new investments, that is something which, from a timeline perspective, can be very uncertain. But currently, considering the way practically transactions are happening, so if the investors are already invested in some funds, or there are overseas structures where there are investors from other countries and the Chinese investment is less than a particular stake, I think the AD banks are taking a position that as long as you have a percentage below a certain threshold, then it should still be possible to make an investment. There are different views on this part also, because recently the government had actually there was a news item. I don't know if it was a clarification, but there was a news item saying that no, even a small percentage Chinese investment is not okay in an indirect structure. So we
Yes.
don't know what the right answer is, but practically, I think transactions are happening. But as otherwise Matthew said, any direct investment currently, it's a long drawn process. We need to be prepared for that. If at all.
Right. Very well said. Abhishek, would you want to add something to?
No, I think Himanshu and Nasin has covered the
Yeah.
question from a regulatory.
Okay. Okay. So we have one question from our audience today. What are the options for raising investments for a DIPP certified company under Startup India scheme? Abhishek, would you want to go? for it since you deal with a lot of startups on an ongoing basis?
Can you just repeat the question, or if I can read the?
Yeah, the question is what are the options available for raising investments for a DIPP certified company, the Startup India thing, under Startup India scheme? Yeah. Do you have, yeah.
So primarily, if it's a startup, they would like to go for equity. In equity, it could be CCPS or an equity funding. That would be one option. And apart from that, if they were looking for a debt, they could go for an ECB. But for ECB, they need to already have an equity holding in it.
But
So
how about convertible note? That's only for startups, right?
convertible notes are also a good option.
In fact, that's only available for startups, registered startups, right?
Yes.
So if I had to evaluate the pros and cons for the convertible note vis-a-vis any other form of debt, what do you think about it? I mean, is that a good option? Would investors be keen on investing in a short-term debt which is convertible into equity at the option of the holder? What do you think about it?
Yes, since convertible notes give you the flavor of debt and equity at the same time, and if someone who's new to the India market and wants to test the market first before entering as an equity holder, convertible note is something which they can look at. From a tax perspective, also, once a convertible note gets converted into equity, it's likely to be tax neutral. So from that front, the investors are also protected, and there's no additional cash outflow for the investor. But one thing which the investor needs to be mindful of is there would be certain tax implications for the interest which they earn on the convertible notes, which will
Okay.
lead to tax compliances in India. But again, my experience, which I have seen, is the tax cost is basically borne by the Indian startup and not the investor. So at the end of the day, yes, convertible notes is something which investors are using
Hmm.
for making investments in startups.
It's becoming common in India, don't you think, Matthew?
Oh, absolutely. It's a fabulous tool for early stage, smaller scale investments, particularly where you want to avoid the cost of going through a valuation or any of those
Right,
things.
right. I
Um,
know.
it's not great for late stage. It's not great for growth stage. CCDs offer significant advantages there. But if I was a investor in Thailand and I wanted to put $1 million down in a startup in India, I'd go convertible note. If I wanted to put 5 mil, 10 mil, 20 mil, I would think of more secure options. What the convertible note doesn't give you is control over the management of the company.
Yeah.
So I mean, even no matter how well you draft it in India, it doesn't give you half the effective protections that equity does. So to that extent, caution you in putting a lot of money into convertible. But I mean, I personally put in investments into startups in convertible notes.
You
Uh,
have?
yeah, if it's small enough, it's great.
Yeah, okay. So with that, you're saying that it's not a very secured option for an investor. Although for a startup, it's pretty good because less compliance in terms of Companies Act as well as other regulatory norms, right?
Yeah,
Is it that?
plus the structures of reserve matters, none of those are there, right? So you have a lot more freedom. If I was a startup, I tell my investors to invest in convertible notes.
Okay, well said. The last question I have is how about neobanks? Can foreign investors send money from a neobank? Uh, can somebody take it up?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, no problems there.
Yes, Matthew.
Absolutely, no problems with sending in money from a neobank.
No, no problem at all. Okay, okay, great, great. I think that gets us to the end of the session. Let me just round up by saying that all the experts here may have not shared so much due to the paucity of time we have here. This topic is such it can take an entire day of healthy and earmarked discussion, especially with the kind of experience and the expertise we're looking at this panel. Thank you so much on behalf of the audience and myself personally for making the most of the time allocated to you all and yet explaining in such lucid and simple terms. Thank you very much, all of
Thank
you.
you so much. Yes, Sukuria. That's what I would say. And I actually don't know about Tamil, but Nandri, yes, Tamil is Nandri. So thank you so much for for great, insightful session. I learned a lot. I perhaps because the content is so rich, I might have to play back the video again to learn and take some notes from all the experts. So thank you so much. Thank you, Wendy, for great moderation. So we will move on to our
Thank you.
exciting
Thank you,
feature
everyone.
so I will end this session. Yep.